الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our lessons on the fiqh of food and drink, we were discussing prior to Ramadan on the issue of the rulings pertaining to the dhaba'ih, the slaughtered meats. And we explained the conditions and the rules until we got to the discussion about the lahm or the luhum Ahlul-Kitab, the meat of the people of the book. And today's lesson, inshallah, will be specifically on this issue to give some tafsir, some detail. So I'd say from the beginning to brothers and sisters to be patient because there'll be some tafsir. Like this is a kind of topic you need detail. Because we said before, a lot of disputes and discussion about what is the ruling of the meat of the people of the book. You first have to understand the mawdu' in its entirety. And from here, next week, inshallah, we will go into the next topic, and it's predicated on this topic, is dependent on it. طيب, the ulama, when they discuss the ruling on the meat of the people of the book, on this controversy that arises, first thing we have to do, we have to divide the issue into three categories. Shaykh Salih Fawzan, he mentions in his kitab Al-At'amah, page 159, that the ulama, they say there's three categories in relation to the meat of the people of the book. Number one, the meat that they slaughtered in accordance to Islamic manner. This is halal bil ijma'. So if you have a Jew or Christian who is a Jew or Christian, and they slaughter the way that we as Muslims slaughter, or the way that it's permitted, i.e. they don't do anything that's a violation, halal bil ijma'. So this one, no one differs. The second category is when the Jew or Christian slaughters in a manner other than our manner, i.e. in a manner that's un-Islamic. For example, they beat it to death. Even if it's a kitabi, فَهُوَ حَرَامٌ, and this is almost agreed upon. Because we know, and this is important, the second category is when you know they did that. If you know a Jew or Christian, beat the animal, drown it, whatever, to death, فَهُوَ حَرَامٌ. And this is because even though they are the correct slaughterman, the right person to slaughter, the method is wrong. So the third category is where the dispute is, which is a Jew or Christian slaughtered a meat in a manner we don't know how they did it. This is where the khilaf is. And why we have to mention this in the beginning? Because Shaykh Salih Fawzan, hafidhullah, when he mentions the topics, he gets to this topic, then we have two opinions. So some people, when they hear the Ahl-Kitab meat, they think from the beginning the Ahl-Kitab meat's dispute. For the Quran, there's no dispute, aslan. The dispute is here. And why do we have to say this in the beginning? Because one of the most important things for the student of knowledge and the Muslim is to have the correct tasawwur, correct conception of an issue. Every time you talk about something, you should know the tasawwur, the conception of the issue to begin with. طيب. The third category, there's two opinions now. And this is what we're familiar with. When you have the meat of the people of the book, which we don't know what they did with it. We don't know if they slaughtered it Islamically or un-Islamically. The ulama are in two groups. And we say from the beginning it's a khilaf, so that if when we get up from the lesson, we already know that whoever holds whatever view on this issue, there is a khilaf between Ahlul Ilm, and we'll mention the names on both sides so it becomes clear. Group number one of the scholars, they say that it is something very doubtful. If you have meat from the people of the book, you don't know what they did with it. It's very doubtful, therefore you should not eat it, better to stay away. Why? Because they have reasons, as I'll come to. So first group of scholars, stay away from the meat of the Ahl-Kitab, which you don't know what they did, or you don't know also what they did, but also you don't know who they are. Maybe they're not even kitabis or not. So that's one group of scholars which many people and brothers and sisters across the Western world and even the Muslim world, they hold that view. Group number two of the scholars, they say that as long as Ahlul Kitab slaughtered the meat, yet we don't know what they did, it still remains halal, permissible, due to the origin that their meat is halal. Right? Surah Ma'idah, ayah number 5. So if Allah made it halal, it's still halal until otherwise proven. That's a second group of scholars. So those people who take that view, majority, minority, maybe it's a smaller group, they hold it because of this group of scholars' view. Therefore, Shaykh Salih Fawzan, he mentions the two groups. Now I'm going to mention the names on both sides so that the brothers and sisters in the beginning can know who are the ulama who hold these views. Too often we know some of the names of one view or not the other. So it becomes sort of like, well, you don't have anyone on your side. And this is the problem. When we talk about these issues, we have to be fair. First group of scholars, those who say that it's not permissible to eat their meat, or the meat of the people of the book who you don't know how they slaughtered. And this is including the meat that comes from the Muslim world, or to the Muslim world from the non-Muslim countries. Because in the Muslim world, a lot of imported meats. So the ulama have ruled the same rulings for imported meat. Who holds this view that you should stay away from such meat if you don't know how it's slaughtered? Number one, the Permanent Committee, Al-Lajnatu Da'ima, Fatwa, so volume 22, page 402. Sheikh Muqbil ibn Hadi al-Wadi'i, rahimahullah, and it's a fatwa on his website. Sheikh Ibn Baz, rahimahullah, in one of his fatwas, volume 23, page 16. You'll see he has another fatwa. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, in one of his fatwas, Fatawa Nur ala Darb, volume 11, page 379. Sheikh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, Silsila Huda wa Nur, tape 56. And lastly, Sheikh Salih Fawzan himself, in his final word on the topic, Kitab Al-At'amah, the book of foods, page 159 to 165. So 6 scholars, at least. Well, there's more, but that's sufficient, I think. Fi Muqabil, on the other side, another 6 scholars. And I believe this is important to mention this. Some of the scholars on the first side have a second fatwa that says it's halal on the other side. And why is this important to know? Because some people may base their ruling that they hold on one view. And they don't know the same sheikh has another view. So sometimes you may ask yourself, why am I being so severe in the issue? Maybe I don't even know it to begin with. I have to be humble. I have to be fair. So who are the scholars who said that the origin is still permissibility, even if we don't know how they slaughtered? Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen again, rahimahullah, in a fatwa he passed in Boston, Massachusetts in the year 2001, 1421, the year he died. And I'm going to say it here, it is important. This is amongst his last fatwas, and he passed the fatwa in America. Because some people say that was in Saudi. He was in America. And the video is online, YouTube. I have the link if you want it. And the reason is very important because there's another fatwa he also passed about niqab while in America. Because some Muslims, they say that, the ahkam in the West is different than the East. And when the sheikh comes from the West to the East, he passes the same fatwa. So this dispels the idea that many of us, unfortunately, we hear, we need to take from the East, West, not the East. But when the sheikh comes from the West, from the East to the West, he still says the same thing. Why didn't he change his view? Sheikh Zayd al-Madkhali, rahimahullah, as well in one fatwa, I believe it's in YouTube, the audio or the translation. Sheikh Sa'ad al-Kathlan from Saudi, from the scholars who specialize in fiqh. Sheikh Sulaymaan al-Ruhaili, hafidhullah. Sheikh Ibn Baz, rahimahullah, another fatwa on his website. And Sheikh Abdul Rahman bin Nasir al-Barrak, and one of his fatwas on his website. And there's more on either side, but that's 6 and 6. And the reason why I mentioned both sides, so that in the beginning no one can accuse any one of us of being unfair. And we'll mention both views, and at the end, inshallah, it becomes clear to you whatever view that you may hold. And I encourage the brothers and sisters to study the issue as well themselves. Tayyib, the first group of scholars, what's their reasoning behind this mawqif? What's their reasoning behind their stance? They have many reasons as to why not to eat the meat of the Ahlul-Kitab, whose slaughter is not known to us. And they cover the issues that they mentioned are in 3 groups. If you think about before, a month before Ramadan, we said that when you slaughter the meat, there's 5 rules, 5 conditions. So the ulama who say it's not allowed mention 3 out of 5 concerns. Number 1, they say that if the meat which is coming to us from Ahlul-Kitab or it's found, we don't know who slaughtered. So the first problem, who's the slaughterman? You can't tell me directly it's Ahlul-Kitab. We don't know. That's number 1. Number 2, they say there's considerable doubt as how they slaughtered. So we don't know exactly if it's a kitabi. I don't even know what they slaughtered, how they slaughtered. And there's some anecdotes and some stories and some reports that they don't do the right way. So some of the ulama said we heard from some people and some who visited, something was done wrong. And they use the hadith of Sahih Tirmidhi, leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. They also say that when it comes to the slaughter, the tasmiyyah, saying Bismillah, is it being pronounced or not, is not clear, and it's a must for Ahlul-Kitab to say the tasmiyyah. It's important. So that's a second category among issues. One is to do with the slaughterer, one to do with the tasmiyyah. Another issue has to do with a qa'idah. But before I get there, somebody also knows, we all know, in the Western world there's a mix of people. We don't know demographics in every country, but there's kitabi and atheists, mulhid, there's non-religious people. The senior scholars, the Council of Senior Scholars, the Hayyat Kibar Ulama, they say after a long discussion, the third situation, if you don't know if the slaughterman who slaughtered is permissible or not, their meat, then this situation, for the most part, the meat comes from abroad. This is the situation for most of the meat that comes from abroad. So the origin here is prohibition. So it's not lawful to eat it from it because we don't know if the meat was issued from the rightful people. So they say if you don't know who slaughtered it, from wherever it came, go on the side of haram, even if it could be a kitabi. It's interesting, and we're going to get to it. Lastly, they have a qa'idah, a principle. And this qa'idah is an important one, and we'll come to explain how the other ulama deal with it. A principle of fiqh, qa'idah fiqhiyya, إِذَا اجْتَمَعَ الْحَلَالُ وَالْحَرَامُ غُلِّبَ الْحَرَامُ. It's important to remember that إِذَا اجْتَمَعَ الْحَلَالُ وَالْحَرَامُ, if something halal and haram come together in one position, or one ruling, or one situation, غُلِّبَ الْحَرَامُ. Haram takes precedence. Same, another way they say it, if there's two things, if there's one means to make something halal, another means which makes it haram, which side is giving preference? The side of the haram. بِجَانِبِ الْحَاضِرِ. And why did they use this principle? Because they say here you said the kitabi, halal meat. Slaughter method, not sure. Which side goes? The haram side. Which is a good qa'idah, it's a good principle. The other group of scholars, they say, at the final conclusion, and I'm going to mention more of their view, Ahlul-Kitab, Allah says in Surah Al-Ma'idah chapter 5, that ayah 5, that their meat is halal for us. So that's the origin, that's the asl. Number 2, doubtful matters should be avoided, but you can't make halal and haram based on doubtful matters. Allah said, إِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا. Conjecture has no avail over truth. So if he told me it's doubtful, it's better. But can you make a ruling based on it? No. You have to have clear cut evidence or certainty or a strong doubts. Not possible. Lastly, they say that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam from other hadith shows us another qa'idah, certainty is not removed by doubt. Okay, now we'll get into the very clear details because that's just a summary of their views. And now I'm going to raise the questions that people ask and what the other ulama who says halal say. And the reason why is because most people, I believe they heard that it's haram or doubtful. Stay away from it. And that's something which is a very strong opinion and safe. The second view, they have answers for their position. So we'll mention inshallah. The first question comes up about the people who are slaughtering, the slaughtermen. Someone may ask, what if you don't know who slaughtered? Doesn't that mean the meat is haram? If I say Ahlul-Kitab here is halal, they'll say you don't know it's a kitabi. Could have been any atheist in the market or in the slaughterhouse. So the ulama replied to this by two ways. First, they say that the principle is that the origin of meat is not prohibition, it's actually permissibility. The first group of scholars, and I think we covered this in Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya, they said that the origin of meat is haram, tahrim. Al-asl fil luhum, tahrim. But the other ulama said this is wrong. Al-asl fil luhum, ibaha. And who said this view? Sheikh Saleh, for example, Sheikh Sa'ad al-Shathari, in his Manzuma Qawaid Fiqhiyya, Sharh Manzuma Qawaid Fiqhiyya, Sheikh Sa'ad Kathlan, he has a risala or essay on the particular issue of the halal meat, this one, Ahl-Kitab, Sheikh Abdul Khawlani, in his Sharh Qawaid Fiqhiyya, and others. So the first group of scholars, they responded by mentioning there's a hadith of Adi bin Hatim, that you often hear it. Every discussion on this, you hear this hadith with Bukhari Muslim. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was told Adi bin Hatim, if you send a dog out for hunting, when you send your dog out, you say Bismillah, and if the dog goes and gets something, and you find another dog there, if you find another dog with your dog, and they both are there and the animal's killed, do not eat from it, for you don't know which of the two killed it. So they say this is clear proof now, that you go with the rule, if you have haram, halal gathered, you go with the haram, safety on the side. The other scholars say that there's a problem with using this evidence in this topic. I'll read Sheikh Sa'ad Shatri, he says, firstly, this is a misapplication of that hadith. Because that hadith is about a different subject. We're not talking about hunting, we're talking about asl and usul. He says asl means something, its origin without proof. If you don't have proof of something, you go back to the usul. So the first problem is we have proof on the topic, we don't need to go to the usul. Also, he says, just because two things come together, and one is halal and haram, you go with the haram, that doesn't mean that's the asl. Now look at the Sheikh's example he gives. He says, example, the origin of water is purity. Origin of water is purity. Now if I go and I pour some impurity into the water, it becomes impure. In this case, you're correct. Impurity and purity met, impurity takes precedence. Like it is the asl of water impurity? No. So how did you take this hadith and make it the asl? We're talking about mawdu', one mawdu' and the other one is a different mawdu'. So just like you cannot say water is impure because when water mixes with najasa it becomes najis, Likewise, you can't say meat also is haram just because two asbab come together. And this is the Shaykh's answer, and then he mentions his view. With that being said, the second thing that comes up is that qa'idah, even though it's correct, it's not in the correct issue at hand. Also, في اللحوم الزباحة. Now, some people who also hold this, the ulama hold this view, they say then, but there's still doubt, so better to avoid. And the ulama, they mention, if we are not sure who slaughtered it, is there sharia way to find out who slaughtered? The answer is yes. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, he mentions how we can find out who slaughtered. And this point is very important because in our world today, maybe this will be most important for our understanding. If I told you now there's somebody slaughtered meat, it could be a kitabi. How do we know who it is? Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen says now, after he discusses this issue, and this is a research he presented to the Hay'a Kibar Ulama, he says then, if the meat comes from those who are rightfully able to eat it or slaughter it, then its origin is not clear to us, i.e. if that person is the actual one, we can look at the qara'in, we can look at contextual indications to find out if they're from the majority or the halal group or not. He says, example number 1, a Muslim comes to you who is trustworthy and tells you this meat was slaughtered by a kitabi or a Muslim. That means it's halal. So if someone comes to you and says, I went to the slaughterhouse, I saw it was a Jew or Christian, that's khabar, it's sahih, you have to take it, or authentic report from a trustworthy Muslim. Okay, somebody will say, I don't have any reports. I went to the grocery store, nobody told me. Second look, that the meat comes from a land whose people, a majority, people whose meat is halal. And this is an important principle, the Sahaba used this principle. And here the Shaykh, he says, to prove this point, he says, so apparent nature is used to the ruling. Look to the Zahir. He quotes now from one of the books of the Hanabil, Al-Muntaha. So Bahuti, he says, slaughtered animals are permissible which are brought forth from places where the slaughter of the people is most likely the people who is allowed to eat from. Whether it be Muslims, people of the book, even if we're ignorant of the slaughter of men pronounced the name of Allah. It's important, the Hanbalis are saying that. Even if we don't, because it's still a person who's halal to eat. Somebody will say, how do you do this in today's time? I'm going to bring you now how the Sahaba dealt with it. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when the Sahaba moved to Iraq, after was conquest happened, they were in the land of the Zoroastrians, the Majus. So Ibn Mas'ud said authentically, verily you live in a land where the Muslims do not slaughter the meat. It is only done by the Nabateans and the Persians. Those two groups of non-Muslims. So when you buy meat, ask, if it's slaughtered from a Jew or Christian, then eat it. For verily their food is permissible for you. This narration is found in Musannaf Abdul Razak and Musannaf Ibn Shaybah and the Isnad al-Sahih, al-Rijal al-Thiqat. Hafid ibn Rajab, rahimahullah, in Jami' Ulum al-Hikam, the 40 hadith explanation, he comments on this narration saying, this is because the majority of the people of Persia were the Zoroastrians and their slaughter meat is not permissible. So here's a qa'idah then, if you go to a land, just look to the majority. If the majority is Ahlul-Kitab or Muslim, halal. So some Muslims, they may say, we don't know, but it's actually not true, you can know. And the Sahaba, they actually used this principle when they went to Iraq. Somebody may also say, well, what about if we can't even tell then? I don't know the numbers. It could be half, 50, 30%. I don't know the majority of the people. In that case, it's haram then. We agree, if you can't even tell the majority, don't eat it. And Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen says this himself at the end of his research for the Hay'a Kibar Ulama, and that's being fair. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, who said it's halal, he says, if you still can't find out who is the majority, stay away from it. And we agree to that because being cautious here is important. Somebody may ask the question then, but brother, we're living in Western secular societies, there's no Ahl-Kitab here. And people like to say this, it's not Ahl-Kitab, these are ilmaniyun, secularists. So Shaykh Sa'ad Kathlan, Hafidullah, was asked the same point in his research. They said to him, the countries which the people of the book are living today are actually secular society. So what's the ruling on their slaughter meat? He says if they ascribe to Jewish nation or Christian nation, then they are people of the book, even if their rulings are secular in society. Many of the Western nations rule using secular law. However, many of the people ascribe to either Judaism or Christianity. So they are the majority, and the majority ascribe to Christianity. Because we don't look to the rules, we look to the people and what they practice or what they believe. When it comes to our country here in Canada, just for our own information, the recent research comes from Pew Research in the year, I think it's 2019. There's 55% of Canadians are Christians. So if someone said majority or not, upon them is the evidence, because this is the most recent data we have. And again, we do agree, the atheists are growing. It's about 30% atheists at the present moment growing, but that doesn't negate the majority. And why I'm saying this, because some people have tawahum. They just say majority is something and they don't know where they're getting it from. We have to be fair. If we're going to make a ruling or something, we have to use numbers and what's in front of us, not just personal opinion. Second issue they raise now about saying the tasmiyyah. Somebody may say, okay, that issue may be clear, but what about the tasmiyyah? The people of the book don't say Bismillah. We know that for sure. And the proof is that whoever works in an abattoir or a slaughterhouse, you see they just cut the meat. So we respond by saying that the ulama mention the tasmiyyah, saying Bismillah, is an amr khilafi. It's a difference of opinion for Ahlul-Kitab, as we mentioned in our lessons earlier. And we mentioned this, if you see Fath al-Alam, Shaykh Hizam, you see the references or the views. And even Imam Ibn Qayyim, he said the same. In Ahkam Ahlul Dhimma, volume 1, page 191. He said a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Does the kitabi have to say Bismillah? So, the other group says yes. The other group of scholars said, you don't have to. But let's get to the reality. If the other group, the kitabi said no, said other than Allah's name, it's haram. But what if the kitabi didn't say anything? Here, which many people, when they talk about tasmiyyah, they tend to put this one below. If the kitabi didn't say anything, then the majority of scholars say it's halal. As Imam Nawawi says in his book, Majmu' volume 9, page 78. If a kitabi just slaughter without Allah's name or anyone's name, فَهُوَ halal. That's majority. Unfortunately, some people say majority, they're saying other names. No, if they didn't say Bismillah, we agree that's a khilaf issue. But what if they didn't say anything? Jumhur, Imam Nawawi says it's permissible. And so the majority, when they mention this point, it shows us that some people, they are not being as clear in the issue. They want to make the issue more black and white. We agree there's confusion, but this is what's been said. So if someone still said, no, I want the tasmiyyah, then they have a haqq to that, they don't have to eat it. But if someone said, I go with the majority here, then they have an opinion. Some people may also raise, as I heard recently, one speaker said that Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin's, one of his last views is that you have to say tasmiyyah. And I want to mention to the brothers that Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin actually held this view. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin held the view, Ahl-Kitab meat here is presently permissible. At the same time, he said you have to say tasmiyyah for Ahl-Kitab. It's very important. Many brothers, they don't know that. Ibn Uthaymin held, you have to say the tasmiyyah. Even though the meat Ahl-Kitab, he says permissible. So one speaker said, I asked the Shaykh, and he said that if you don't, they didn't say anything. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin said, don't eat it. But is that the only opinion Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin said? And the answer is no. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is that somebody cannot just have one fatwa and say that's Ibn Uthaymin's view. Be fair and read other views. Example, in the Shar' Ta'liq al-Iqtida' Sirat al-Mustaqim, Ibn Uthaymin says something very interesting. He says, after he talks about the tasmiyyah, being severe in the slaughter of the people of the book and declaring it invalid or unlawful because they didn't mention the name of Allah, then we say even if they didn't mention the name of Allah, then the issue is not one of consensus. See, Shaykh Uthaymin, the same one who said that they have to tasmiyyah, he still has some leniency. He says it's not like a lazim issue, it's a khilaf. And he brings some points and he says at the end, the intention, my ta'liq here, he says, my brothers, that we do not be severe upon people. Nowadays, some people are severe upon their brothers. And why am I saying this? Because there's some people who are weaponizing the fatwa. And the same Uthaymin said, but Uthaymin also said this. We have to be fair. We have to be fair. And even if someone said Uthaymin didn't hold the view, or held the view, other mashayikh who hold the same view didn't say that. So the bottom line is that there is more to the issue than comes to hand. So the summary of this is, if you believe the tasmiyyah for a kitabi is a must, then you would not eat the meat because you don't have clarity. But if the same person looked and said, I don't know what they said, there's an argument strongly for the majority say that if you don't know what they said, it's still halal. Now we come to another issue connected to this. Some brothers, they raise, okay, if the tasmiyyah, even if they didn't say it, what about saying the tasmiyyah for each slaughter? You go to the slaughterhouse, they say Bismillah in the beginning, and then they cut 100 chickens. That's not allowed. But the permanent committee said that it's actually allowed. As long as the slaughter is continuous, and the tasmiyyah happened in the beginning, it's permissible. Some Muslims hold the view it has to be tasmiyyah for each one. That's an opinion, but it's not a must. As we see, the permanent committee in the fatwas on Ifta in English says you don't have to. And the reason why I mentioned that, the reality is even in the Muslim slaughterhouses, they don't do that. Most likely. Why? Because you have to slaughter so much chicken, and not everyone does it one by one. So if you flip the situation, say, حَتَّى فِي الذَّبِيحَةِ, it doesn't happen that way. Are you going to bring shak for the dhabiha? And why am I saying this? Because there's some people, maybe, They don't understand that the issue, because it's a khilafi, we have to be a lot more fair in seeing the issues where they're coming from, where the different views are coming from. Another issue that comes now is about the stunning. And this one is the one that many people ask. They say, fine, if we know who slaughtered it, if we say that tasmiyyah can be overlooked, what about the stunning? And what they mean by that is not stunning just with the stun gun, because we talked about that some weeks ago. They say the stunning with the gas, the gassing of the chickens. And I believe many of the brothers, they saw recently, there was some documentary on the YouTube about the gassing of the chickens in the Muslim slaughterhouses and how it's halal and haram, and confuse people. في الحقيقة, some Muslims got shak about the halal, which is not good. But we're going to answer now. First things, that scholars spoke about it. Alhamdulillah, they spoke about gassing the chicken. It's called controlled atmospheric stunning, CAS. And this kind of stunning is when what you do is you put some carbon dioxide and argon gas, and you regulate it so that the chicken loses oxygen and it goes in like a state of unconsciousness. And then if they regulate it more, it can come back to life. You can bring it back to life by increasing the oxygen, and the chicken comes back to life. But before slaughter, they put it on, it dies, there's a particular procedure, how much you have to do, and then it's still alive for about, they mentioned specific numbers, I forget now how much long it is, then you can slaughter. First thing someone say, is this something healthy or ethical? The specialists in the topic, they say if it's done properly, it's ethical. It's not harmful to the animal. And this is, for example, one, I mentioned her name before, Dr. Temple Grandin. She's the expert in animal welfare. She said it's actually something which is 100% puts the chicken into a state of unconsciousness if done properly, and they don't die, and it's not harmful. And the reason why I'm saying that is that it doesn't kill them, as some people say. And some people say it just kills all of them, and that's not true. If done properly, it doesn't happen like that. And you can see her research on the website, her official website. طيب, what's the hukm shar'i on this? Because in the documentary they were raising the questions, كأنه haram. But the Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami in Jeddah, in Saudi, in the year 1418, 1997, they actually said it's permissible. They mentioned about stunning, they put a long list, how to stun, for example, 100 to 400 volts, etc., etc. It's important. Majma' al-Fiqh already detailed everything. At the end they say, it is not haram to eat animals that were slaughtered properly after being stunned by using a mixture of carbon dioxide and air or oxygen, or by using a non-penetrating bolt gun that does not lead to the death of the animal before it's properly slaughtered. Majma' al-Fiqh is the biggest council for the Muslim world today. All the world, ulama kibar, they go there, and Sheikh Salih Fawzan and others, and they recommend it. So when somebody raises the question and says haram, we have to say, who said that in opinion in the first place? If it's done incorrectly, that's another issue. It should not be done incorrectly. But these are professionals, they're doing it the way that's advised. So the reason why I'm raising this issue, unfortunately, some of these issues, people may speak about it, and we have to be honest and say, what did our ulama say? They're the ones we take our knowledge from. On top of this, coming back to Toronto in Canada, the biggest halal monitoring authority is HMA, Halal Monitoring Authority. And we'll talk about them more later, about their different views. But they even talk about it on their website. HMA is probably the biggest authority in Toronto for the halal meat, HMA. They even say that CAS is permissible. And they're Ahnaf, and they take a more strict view on this slaughter. They say on the website, since CAS is irreversible method of stunning, where the birds eventually die, the halal monitoring authority does not approve it except when the following conditions are met, which is the same conditions that the professionals and the ulama advise. And the bottom line is that if it's slaughtered between 2 to 6 minutes, and that's the policies, and so then they say if it's done like this, it's permissible. If it's done wrongly, we agree that is not correct. One last point on this, somebody may say, in Canada, how often are animals gassed, or chickens? The HMA, who have more access to the slaughterhouse than any other group, they say most Canadian abattoirs, slaughterhouses, use water bath stunning. So don't even worry about it. Majority don't use the gassing anyways. So that also helps some brothers who watched the documentary and then they got into shak. And the reason why I'm mentioning on this, you can see from different viewpoints, not just only one viewpoint. Somebody may raise a question then and say, okay, even if we agree to this, what about if the chicken still died? Because everyone wants to know about the probability, how likely they're going to die. It's not very likely, but let's say there are some chickens who die. Just like if you slaughter now with a stun gun, small percentage will die before slaughter. Hatta even regular slaughter. If you slaughter it, sometimes the chicken or the goat, it might die, you don't know about it. So some people say that. I've seen videos of animals being abused in the slaughterhouses. And this is often the evidence most Muslims use, the video clips that they see from biased organizations like PETA. So we shouldn't even be watching videos that come from organizations who are against eating animals to begin with. I don't think that's a fair strategy. But even if it came from a correct source, what is the ruling when the majority is okay, but sometimes there's this slip up? The truth is, the ulama mentioned this under another qa'idah in fiqhiyya, and this is because there's possibilities everywhere. It's true. Even halal slaughter, dhabiha slaughter, it's possible the chicken you're eating, the Muslim slaughter forgot the tasmiyyah. But no Muslim, when they buy the halal meat from the store, ever crosses their mind that issue. Because we know that's very unlikely. You then take this qa'idah in Islam, rarities, right? Something which Ahmed mentioned recently at this point. In our Sharia, we take the ghalib, not the nawadir. And the qa'idah fiqhiyya, al-ibratu lil-ghalibi, al-sha'i' la lil-nadir. It's a qa'idah fiqhiyya that covers this issue as well. The lesson or the benefit is given to the consideration of the majority or the common, more widespread issue, not the rarity. It's like saying that the water that I'm using to make wudu could have najasa in it, but when I look at the water, it's clean from najasa. Am I going to be thinking, could have some molecules of najasa? Some Muslims, they are affected by this to the point that they have so much shubuhat. They will go to the washroom, they will go anywhere and say it could be impure, this could be halal. Al-ibratu lil-ghalib, al-sha'i' la lil-nadir. If you remember that, it gives you calm. So now, some fuqaha, they said, then go to the halal meat Ahl-Kitab. Ahl-Kitab, they're not always clean. They don't care about the tahara like we do. They might have najasa. Even the awani, their food vessels could be with khamr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to eat their vessels from their food and their vessels if we clean it, despite the fact that it could be there. Why? Because generally, Allah from rahmah of Allah, He made this permissible. So the general ruling was given, if you have proof, go with it. If you don't, then don't be hesitant. Same thing with a Muslim. A Muslim, his slaughter is halal, but what if the Muslim doesn't pray? All the scholars mention, if he doesn't pray, this person's slaughter, they mention the fuqaha, that his slaughter, the person doesn't pray, is not to be eaten. The problem we have now, who would ever think about this issue in relation to the meat that we eat nowadays? They won't even go there. No one's thinking that way. You then go with that which is apparent, don't go with that which is possible. So if I bring you 2 or 3 videos, we could say, yes, something's happening. But if you told me this is the standard national policy, then you have to bring proof. Because that wouldn't be talking without knowledge and to make assumptions that are not there. Somebody else may raise another question, which is that, what about using the hot water for the chicken? And we spoke about before, we said in Islam, it's allowed to slaughter the chicken, and the way the chicken should be slaughtered, nowadays the way that they do it, they slaughter it, or they stun it, or usually they slaughter it, then they run it through the hot water, or they run it through the hot water first to stun it. Sometimes, some places, what they do when they slaughter the animal, they run it through hot water to defeather it, but they didn't clean the insides. So it still has some intestines and blood in there. Some fuqaha, they say that it's haram, particularly in the madhab of the Ahnaf, because they say if you didn't gut the animal and you put it to the hot water, it's going to mix with the meat, it's going to become najis. So this is an opinion mentioned, but the permanent committee said in one of the fatwas here that the meat is considered halal still. Because if the animal is already slaughtered, the najasa of this blood is not najis now, or if it's whatever is in its guts is washed out, it's not najis, there's no dalil for that. So I'm mentioning this because some consideration was mentioned there, and some said that even after slaughter the sin, not before. So we say that there's a difference of opinion there, it's not something black and white. Another question that comes up from Muslims is that what about if the animal is abused? Ta'adib al-hayawan. So you beat the animal before slaughter, or you stun it, or you hang it upside down, which is severely painful, then you slaughter it. Some Muslims, they mix up the 2 issues. They mix up between the dhabiha and the ta'adib. Punishing or torturing animals, haram. No one allows it from the ulama, and no Muslim would want to do that, or even non-Muslim. In the situation that animals are mistreated in the Muslim world, in the slaughterhouses, that is a separate issue than its halal, its meat being halal. Some Muslims, they mix the 2, and they say that it's unethical, therefore it's haram. We say ethics is one thing, and the halal and haram is another thing. Therefore the fuqaha, they mention, if an animal was slaughtered by a rough knife, which is not allowed, because the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us to use a sharp knife, Hadith Sahih Muslim. And you're not supposed to sharpen it in front of it. But let's say someone did it. Is it dhabiha haram? And Abu Abbas al-Qurtubi in Mufhim, he says, no, it's still halal, but the person is sinful for that. So it's important. You can't mix the two. Some Muslims, they're mixing the two. Ta'zeeb is haram, but the meat is halal, and this is what our ulama, they mention. So if the issue, if you're worried about ethical slaughter, it does exist. So ethical slaughter and mechanical slaughter that sometimes is done wrongly, or even animal welfare, Islam comes in favor of animal welfare. Sadly, our ministry is not very good at that, and some people who work in their places may not be careful. But don't make haram that which is halal based on something outside of it. And this issue is an issue that the ulama, they mention. One last point from this, fine, inshallah, which we'll wrap around, is that when we come to this issue as well, people may also raise questions about why even go there if we have alternative which is halal. Somebody will say, why even eat the meat, brother, if we have halal meat available? So we'll say this is correct. Eating the halal meat and the dhabiha, which is slaughtered by Muslims, is better, safer, better for your deen, and more supportive for the Muslim community, because you're giving the money to the community. But there are some people who may live in a society where there is no Muslim community. There may be somebody who is on the safar, traveling, and they come by and they want to eat some meat, and they study the issue and they hold this view. We cannot tell them the preference that we have as a ruling. Ruling should be all across the board, not preferences. If you prefer not to eat it, that's fine, you have a view. If you prefer to eat it, there's a view. But if someone should not say that it's not even necessary, because everyone has the right to look into the issue. So we'll say that it's better to advise people that which the ulama advise. Had it been a black and white issue, we would not have seen the khilaf to begin with. Lastly, with all this being said, this is where the other issue comes. And next week we'll talk about it. Now that we've covered talking about halal meat and Ahlul-Kitab meat, and inshallah it becomes clear to the brothers that there's two valid opinions. Everyone should take an opinion which they see to be safer or closer to the haqq in their view. None of us should be forcing someone to take a view because we believe better. We say you take what you find to be closer to the truth. As you can see, both views, and that's why I brought both views, and all the evidences are there. So to have more spaciousness is better. But predicated on your view about Ahlul-Kitab meat comes the next issue we'll talk about next week, which is that after we talked about meat, now we move to the halal rulings in relation to non-animal byproducts or non-animal products, and animal products that have animal derivatives or byproducts. So next week, inshallah, we'll talk about, from this issue comes now, what about issues like food, pastries, vitamins, creams, all these things, where they have animal byproducts which come from Ahlul-Kitab meat. So the question about gelatin, right, this question, or rennet, L-lestine, etc., we'll talk about those issues. It's part of this issue. So whatever your mawqif is, your position on this will dictate your position on that one, even though there's a little bit more rules to help. And the reason why I'm saying that is some Muslims, they don't understand that. If you take one view, you can see consistency in another view. But if you say, for example, one view, you say that stay away from one thing, and then the next one you engage in, you're not being consistent. As well, halal meat and issues, or halal food, they also goes beyond that. So we'll talk about, inshallah, issues like vinegars, and some contemporary issues as well, inshallah ta'ala, as much as we can, because we want to make as detailed as can to offer the answers from the ulama. And alhamdulillah, our scholars have dealt with these issues in some great detail. Inshallah, with this much we'll end, because we went to some significant detail. And I advise the brothers and sisters afterwards to review that which we said, to understand properly the different views, so as not to mix up, right, what was said. And also, as advice, to be careful, but also generous with our brothers and sisters, to have spaciousness. It's a fiqh issue. And khilaf is bound to happen. It's not an issue of aqeedah or usul. It's a furu'i issue, subsidiary. So adab is needed. Right? When you deal different with people, adab ikhtilaf. Some people, what happens is they don't know the mas'ala, and then they're yelling at other people, coming to them when they're eating and telling them you're eating haram and disturbing their consciousness. This is not the adab of the Muslim. Even if the person was mistaken or ignorant, there's a means to correct. Also, I forgot to mention this point. When we talk about Hadith Adi ibn Hatim, we said that this hadith is about slaughter of animals, hunting. The scholars will say that the asl for meat to be halal is the hadith Aisha radiallahu anha fi al-Bukhari Muslim. When they brought the meat to the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, said that here's a meat of people who recently embraced Islam, and they bring meat and we don't know whether they said Bismillah or not. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, you should mention Allah's name and eat it. So Shathari, he says, if the case was that the asl here, halal and haram both meant, the asl is haram, the Prophet ﷺ never said that. And this is helpful because this principle, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam practiced it for the Sahaba and even himself. Because some people will say, how did the Sahaba deal with it? If we really wanted to be honest, you'll see the Sahaba had they were more principled in the issue than maybe we are. In that they were more aware of what's halal and haram and stuck to it, and they had less shubuhat. Example, Shaykh Uthaymeen mentioned this point, and this will come maybe next week or the weeks after about restaurants. You go to eat somebody's meat and they give you meat, you don't know what it is. Should I interrogate the person and their meat? Shaykh Uthaymeen uses the same hadith. Aisha says, Nabi ﷺ didn't do that here, nor in the hadith when he received the meat from the Jewish woman was poisoned. How can then we become and be more religious than the Rasul ﷺ when he says in the hadith Sahihain, I fear Allah more than you? And the reason I'm mentioning is that some people may think that somebody they perceive to be lenient here has low taqwa. They'll say, astaghfirullah, look at the person just eating anything. He doesn't ask. And then if you discuss it, you'll find that Nabi ﷺ did something similar and they get confused. In fact, you may say if you wanted to do it because it gives you yaqeen and this is something, inshallah, Allah will reward you for it. But to make it something to embarrass someone else is not fair. Last point is, no one argues in this discussion that a Muslim should be careless. Shaykh Salih Fawzan, he mentions that, and even Shaykh Uthaymeen. Staying away from doubtful things is always best. But if someone studied and finally came to this conclusion, they are allowed to practice what they want after they studied it with ilm. So the difference is that if someone advises you nicely, brother, I think it's better to avoid, you thank them. Jazakallah khair for giving me the good advice. It's true. Khuruj bin khilaf awla. Staying away from differing opinions and staying out of differing issues for that which is agreed upon, always safe. But if someone said, brother, I looked into it too, this is what I believe, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide me and I'm going to practice it, you can't force him after that. And I want to mention that point too, that inshallah it becomes clear. Inshallah, anyone has any questions, we'll take them. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So that's a good question. If someone goes to the halal meat shop, should be asking for their certification, or in the restaurants the same thing? The ulama, they mentioned first of all, halal certification is permissible to have. Lajnatu Da'ima, one of the fatwas they mentioned, is permissible for a Muslim organization to give non-Muslim certification of a halal meat. So if someone has certification, it's like a ziyada for your reliability or your comfort. It's fine. But you don't need it to be halal. That's the first thing. Some Muslim think is must. Most of the meat we eat and back home anywhere doesn't have any certificate. Now it's became popular because of the fraud. So the first problem is hukm shar'i, it's permissible to have it, not a condition. Secondly, if you go to the restaurant, you can take a look at what they're doing. For example, is their meat clean? Who are they? Are they practicing? If you're in doubt, it's permitted to ask, they say, if someone doesn't know their reliability. But Shaykh Uthaymeen was very staunch, it's not permitted. He says it's not appropriate to go and interrogate. Some they will go to restaurants and they harass them about the expiry date of their slaughter, of their certificate. And it's there, but it's expired. And they forget the janib, the other side, which costs money to get a certification, thousands of dollars. So the problem here is that if we go to one extreme, Shaykh Uthaymeen says tanattu', extremism. Some they even go to the back and they see how they handle the meat. And it is too much. Because if you go to this level, you're not going to eat anything. Others, they go to the point, they just say he's a Muslim. They don't even know he's Muslim. That's another problem. If it's a Muslim slaughterhouse, giving them the meat, you know the name, okay, I know. Also, if you're someone not careful, you can find out the different slaughterhouses. So the conclusion is that it's not a must. Someone should not be excessive. If they did it to give them more tawfiq, this is fine, but they should not be extreme in this. And I would also say that, alhamdulillah, now online you can see the slaughterhouses or the places where they get the meats from beforehand. So you can check where does my meat come from, if you're very aware of it. But to go on to make trouble and this, especially for the Muslims. And I mention a qissa because it's appropriate. Some of the people differ about the slaughtered meat machine, mechanical slaughter. We spoke about its permissibility. And what they do is they go to the restaurant which offers meat and they're excited to eat, then they find a slaughter and they start harassing, back-talking the manager as if his fault for taking his view. So they went there to eat, they found out, and then instead of leaving, they're abusing the Muslim. He's a Muslim brother. Why? We don't go to non-Muslims and do that. And what happens is some managers become apprehensive. They don't want to talk about the meat situation because some people are giving them a hard time. It's not the way a Muslim, a Muslim, we shouldn't be this way. Wallahu a'lam. Yes.
In the event that someone accidentally consumes, or not accidentally, unknowingly consumes something that is not permissible, like for example, a batch of meat that is from a dead animal, would it apply to them the hadith about how the one who consumes meat or drinks that are haram, then their du'as are not accepted, or is that?
So if someone, the brother's asking, someone ate haram meat by accident, and they don't know it was haram, and now is their dua in trouble? We say, first of all, if you didn't know something, you didn't, know it's halal or haram, then you're not held accountable the same as someone who ate haram. It's a mistake. Allah forgives us for our mistakes. Secondly, it happened to the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum. They ate some meat, later on they found mashbuh, it was an ambiguous meat. Or they ate something and they found later on the person, it's halal like laysa tayyib. Tayyib means the tariqah which was gained was haram. They stole it. Hadith al-Bakr, I believe, it was narrated in Bukhari, if I'm correct, about the young boy who brought him the meat and he did some kahana, some sorcery or fortune telling and got the meat. Al-Bakr vomited. He vomited out the meat or the food because he had wara', God consciousness and scrupulousness. He was worried. This is higher level. But the ulama say you're forgiven. And I believe that's the point, you're forgiven. Allah said, لَيْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ جُنَاحٌ فِيمَا طَعِمُوا. And to the end of the verse, if someone ate something by accident or mistakenly or before it was prohibited and then it became halal, there's no junah because you were mistaken. So ask Allah to forgive you and inshallah your dua will not be hampered by that. Because you didn't do it deliberately. Allahu a'lam. Anyone else have any questions? طيب. So it's a good question. Some now we say, how about the corporations? So we have the hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was brought meat from the kitabi, the Jewish woman who poisoned it, or in the hadith Aisha, and they don't know what it is, and he still ate it. Means from general rule. This is applied to corporations who say they're Jews and Christians. Sheikh Barak in his fatwa, he said, yes, corporations, if they fall into this from Ahlul-Kitab as well. It goes the same way. Means if you know this corporation slaughters, or the individuals are a part of it, or then you go to the one who slaughtered. So you could say the corporation, if they're Ahlul-Kitab and they're slaughtering the meat themselves, or they get it from people who slaughtered, you can make a judgment based on that. It goes with the corporation also, not just individuals. But the bottom line is, you look for that which is zahir, which is apparent to us. So to truth be told, we don't have the details of every single one who slaughtered. We can only say, okay, slaughterhouse, where did they slaughter, what's their name, and like this. And so it can count like that. And obviously if someone is doubtful, alhamdulillah, the internet, there's lots of information. You can Google and find a little bit more information. That is also helpful. Use the information in front of you just to find some details. And once you have the details and you know your qawa'id, you move with it. Because the Muslim has to walk with the principles, and that's the conclusion we mentioned. Everything here, go back to kulliyat and qawa'id. If you don't have principles and rules, you're going to be just, he says halal, she says haram, halal, haram, and you don't have anything. But if you know the principles now, then you go and research, okay, this company said this and this, from what I understood is this rule, okay, inshallah I can do this. Next week, inshallah, we'll talk about the non-meat products which have non-meat products which have the animal enzymes and derivatives, and how to deal with that. And also, we'll mention, inshallah, the same kind of positions there that our ulama have taught us. Subhanakallahum bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.